Hello everybody, this is Fernando for Godzilla Movie News. Another entry into my Cryptids and Monsters channel. This time, not actually something that's animalistic or even human in nature, but rather comes from the plant world. And it's the concept known as the man-eating tree. And there's various examples that I'll illustrate here, including some real-world examples that currently exist right now. But to start off, in actuality, the concept of the man-eating tree has been proven to actually be a hoax. There haven't been really any solid reports, anything as far as actual evidence of such an existence out there. But there are some traits within the forest world right now that do mimic the man-eating tree concept. So while while it is actually non-existent, still some traits of it do exist, and I'll illustrate like what I mean in a little bit here. Now, the concept of the man-eating tree, it has been around since about the 1800s. The earliest known example was a tree called the Madagascar tree, and it was heralded from a tribe called the Madagascar tribe. There was apparently a German explorer named Carl Leachy who stated that he witnessed a sacrifice performed around this Madagascar tree. And apparently the tribe there were making a sacrifice with regards to a young woman, and as they placed a young woman upon the tree, you'll see an expert on here, it was as if instinct with demonic intelligence fastened upon her in sudden coils, round and around her neck. Then as she was screaming, more laughter arose wildly, and she was instantly strangled. And then, one after the other, the tendrils, like great green snakes, retracted themselves and wrapped her in. So the concept of the Madagascar tree was something that needed to have sacrifice. The Madagascar tribe made sure that happened, and death was almost like a serpent would kill you, in that it would wrap its tendrils around you, strangle you, and then consume you afterwards. There was further evidence given apparently in a 1924 book by the governor of Michigan, Chase Osborne, but he stated that both the tribes and the missionaries, everybody associated essentially on this, he backed it up, in other words. But later on, in a 1955 book called Salamanders and Other Wonders, everything related to the Madagascar man-eating tree was apparently all fabrications. Maybe it was done to try to sell more newspapers at the time. Again, a lot of print at the time in the 1800s. There was no journalistic ethics. It was essentially what was done to try to sell the most number of copies. And so the concept of the Madagascar tree and everything associated with it, without any solid proof anywhere else, has been relegated to nothing more than a hoax. But there is another claim of some similar type of tree. This goes actually also into the 1800s, and we're talking that in the area of Central and South America. It's called a tree called the Yateo, which, if you know Spanish, you'll see that Yateo means essentially I see you. And it was said that this plant or tree could consume large insects, but that would also attempt to consume nearby humans. Again, no real reports from anywhere else regarding this. The only closest one was apparently a book called Land and Sea by J.W. Buell, and nothing else was reported afterwards. So again, it leaves it out there as to whether this truly existed or not. But anything as far as the 1900s and into the 2000s, nothing has existed at all regarding any type of man-eating tree. Fascinating concept, though, because, again, as I was saying earlier, while the man-eating tree doesn't exist, or no proof of it exists anywhere, there are similar plants out there right now that do have traits associated with the man-eating tree. One can only look at a real-world example. I've included a picture of it here. It's a weird name to call, but it's called the Nepenthes raja, and it's essentially the best concept of, if you think of any kind of like Venus flytrap, think of it but on a much larger scale, and that's what you have here. All it is a plant that produces a sweet nectar. It attracts bugs, it attracts lizards, maybe even birds. And as it attracts them, and they happen to fall into the inside, then the lid closes, and that's essentially stuck. So it eats and consumes these poor insects, poor beings. But such is nature, and compared to, you see the size here, it's not really that much larger. But if something like that did exist, let's say a couple of times larger, could it consume humans as well? Well, potentially, but of course it would have to be made of a much stronger material to prevent any human from going out. I wonder too, back in the dinosaur age, everything was much larger than today. You had relative plants, relative animals that exist today, but their ancestors were much, much larger. So if we see this plant here today as is, probably about the size of a forearm, if something like that existed during the dinosaur age, could it perhaps have been trapping small dinosaurs? Or maybe something involving human-sized mammals and so forth? Potentially. There's no proof that something like that exists, of course, because it's much harder on the plant side to record fossils as opposed to anything involving some like animals with actual bones. But sure enough, it could actually exist. But the concept itself of a man-eating tree, still a popular one. In fact, it's made its way into the Lord of the Rings mythology. Anyone who follows that world knows that there's a character in there called Old Man Willow, which is a moving tree of sorts, a living tree, that uses hypnotic spells to try to lure animals and humans and other types of beings close to it to ensure that it sleeps next to it, and then slowly but surely it starts to wrap its limbs and ferns and leaves around the victim, and then it slowly consumes them. If anyone has seen the extended scene in one of the Lord of the Rings movie, I think it was the first one, you'll see what I'm talking about there. But yep, otherwise that's my report on the latest Cryptids and Monsters video, this one involving the man-eating tree. Again, to sum it all up, no real proof that anything has ever existed as such type. We do have very close variations of it right now in the real world, but who knows, maybe back in the dinosaur world there really was something like that going on. So thanks.